Pancho Villa was known as the Centaur of the North throughout northern Mexico due to his new military tactics involving fast cavalry marches. Emiliano Zapata died in 1919, but people still swore they saw him on his horse in the hills of southern Mexico into the 1940s. These men are famous figures in Mexican history because they fought for individual rights and wanted to help people experiencing poverty. The Mexican Revolution was one of the pivotal events of the 20th century, so important that it informs how we picture revolutions in general today. It lasted from 1910 to around 1920 and was filled with international spies, bloody battles, and dramatic spiritual moments. It was even one of the first wars widely documented on camera and video. Two of the most famous figures from this time were Pancho Villa and Emiliano Zapata. They worked together from the north and south to save their country from a dictatorship, and their actions helped Mexico develop the distinctive culture and heritage it celebrates today. The Mexican Revolution is critical in modern history, and by examining the alliance between Pancho Villa and Emiliano Zapata, we can catch a glimpse of how the revolution succeeded and the people who made it happen. What led up to the Mexican Revolution? Mexico had been ready for revolution for many years before it finally erupted. President Porfirio Diaz had been running the country for 3 decades, virtually unopposed under false democratic appearances. Recently, historians have been more hesitant to make him a complete villain because Diaz was trying to hold his country together. It had been torn apart by coups for years before he took over, and his rule was characterized by stability and economic improvements. However, these improvements were not felt by all, because most of the industrial improvements came from foreign investors, so those who could not take advantage of them remained impoverished. The fear of foreign takeover and the dissatisfaction among the peasantry fed the growing instability. The peasantry wasn't only suffering from low wages and mistreatment. The rural workers were forced to work in semi-enslavement. They were indebted for life to the wealthy landowners, and the debt was passed down through the generations, reducing anyone's hope of freedom or self-improvement. In 1908, Porfirio Diaz mentioned in an interview that he would welcome an oppositional political party in Mexican politics. It might have merely been a polite statement for the discussion, but it gave enough of an opening for Francisco Ignacio Madero to step into the political arena. Francisco Madero came from a wealthy family, but he was still profoundly interested in the social issues of the day. He wanted to improve living and working conditions for the peasants. He was also a spiritualist who dabbled in mediumship. According to Madero, his work as a medium revealed to him he would one day be president of Mexico. When Diaz mentioned welcoming political opposition, Madero published The Presidential Succession of 1910, in which he criticized the current political situation without directly attacking Diaz and called for freedom for all without calling for revolution. Madero followed up his book with a national presidential campaign, much to Diaz's annoyance. As Madero's popularity rose, Diaz imprisoned him until after the elections. Madero's father used his influence to get Madero released, and Madero fled north to America. From there, he called for his fellow Mexican citizens to take up arms in rebellion against the current government, setting the date for November 20th, 1910. Despite Porfirio Diaz's belief that Mexico would not succumb to revolution, the rebellions on November 20th soon spread, and areas across Mexico erupted into chaos and violence. Two of the most problematic rebel groups were led by Pancho Villa in the north and Emiliano Zapata in the south. Pancho Villa and Madero were allies in this first stage of the revolution. While Pancho Villa did not wholly agree with Madero, his troops were loyal to Madero, so he had to coordinate his movements with him. Emiliano Zapata was not interested in politics. He wanted to return the land to its rightful owners, the peasantry. Diaz could not control the various rebellions across the nation. When the United States threatened to intervene, he stepped down, allowing the revolution to be victorious. However, for Madero, this was only the beginning of his troubles. His revolution did not truly solve the problems Villa and Zapata had been fighting for. Zapata even met Madero to request help restoring the land to his people. But Madero was more focused on establishing peace first. His lack of immediate action infuriated Zapata. Villa did not do much better, for he continued attacking areas with his group of outlaws. Madero had to imprison Villa to keep the army from executing him. People who supported Diaz's government hated Madero because they thought he was weak. Soon, Mexico erupted into revolution again, resulting in Madero's death and setting the country on a violent path. It would shape Mexico into the country it is today, and Pancho Villa and Emiliano Zapata would return to play critical roles in the Mexican Revolution. How did Pancho Villa and Emiliano Zapata work together during the Mexican Revolution? Pancho Villa and Emiliano Zapata did not appear to have a formal alliance. However, they still used similar methods to achieve the same goal. Pancho Villa had escaped prison and was living in El Paso, Texas, but when he heard of Madero's death, he jumped back into his old role with a vengeance. Victoriano Huerta, a more senior, decorated military general who made Diaz's old supporters breathe a sigh of relief, soon found that disposing of Madero was only the start of his problems. In addition to pressures from the United States over Mexican alliances with Germany around 1914, Huerta soon found himself amid a complete uproar. Before the revolution was over, almost every part of Mexico was affected by the violence as the government's army clashed with the local troops. There were at least 4 prominent leaders of the People's Armies, but 2 of the most famous were Villa and Zapata. Villa re-entered the Mexican Revolution focused on revenge and justice. He crossed back into Mexico in April 1913 with only 7 men and a little food. Within a few months, he had thousands of troops, 30 cannons, and several machine guns. He was famous for his ruthlessness and unstoppable conquests. But Pancho Villa also cared deeply for people experiencing poverty. He was even the governor of Chihuahua for a short time. During that time, he confiscated gold and land and used the new riches to fund his military efforts. Villa also decreed that land owned by the wealthy would be redistributed. However, Pancho Villa was not interested in governing. So in January 1914, he started marching south again, heading for Mexico City. While Pancho Villa was dominating northern Mexico, Emiliano Zapata was stirring up forces in the south. Zapata wanted land and freedom for rural workers, and his tenacity earned him the nickname Attila of the South. Every Mexican president around this time wanted to stamp out Zapata's forces and other far radical groups in the revolution. However, finding his troops was nearly impossible because they blended in with the ordinary peasants. The newspapers fed the public's fear by describing Zapata and his troops as savage barbarians. The negative press did not stop Zapata from marching to the capital. Other revolutionary leaders were marching to the capital, but part of the chaos of the Mexican Revolution was the lack of unity. Each revolutionary leader fought for his own interests. Only Villa and Zapata appear to have had sympathy for each other because both were peasants fighting for the radical side of the revolution. President Victoriano Huerta no longer had control of the country. For a short time, Mexico did not have a true leader. The division caused international intervention from the United States, Argentina, Brazil, and Chile. Huerta was forced to resign from the presidency, leaving the country in the hands of the revolutionaries. How did Villa and Zapata impact the attempts at peace talks? The revolutionaries knew they needed to find an agreement. While Villa and Zapata had an unofficial alliance, there was another revolutionary named Venustiano Carranza, who was more conservative than the other 2, and there were other localized leaders. Every leader had a plan to make Mexico better, but Mexico was descending into anarchy between them. Carranza decided to facilitate a truce and called a meeting for all revolutionaries in Aguascalientes, a quiet town that had so far avoided the fighting. Delegates first arrived in the Morelos Theater on October 10, 1914. While there were representatives from Carranza, Villa, and many other local revolutionary leaders, they were still missing the Zapatistas. Emiliano Zapata and his troops did not arrive until October 27th. Some hoped he and Villa would be able to bring peace to Mexico because they were in general agreement. With Zapata's arrival, the Aguascalientes Convention became the most authoritative body in the Mexican Revolution. However, there were only a few weeks of relative peace. The convention soon divided into 2 camps, Villa and Carranza. In an attempt to reconcile the groups, the Aguascalientes Convention named General Eulalio Gutierrez as the republic's new president, because he was unknown at the time. However, when he appointed Pancho Villa as the government's new military chief, people realized who controlled the convention. Both Villa and Zapata began moving toward Mexico City. Carranza fled the capital for Puebla, and the people panicked because they believed the Zapatistas were bloodthirsty barbarians. The city immediately relaxed when Emiliano Zapata arrived at the capital on November 24, 1914. The Zapatistas were dressed as peasants and spoke indigenous languages, asking citizens for food instead of looting the stores. Pancho Villa's forces began arriving a few days later, although Villa himself did not arrive until December. They entered Mexico City on December 6, 1914, and took a picture with the president's chair. At the moment, the people of Mexico held the power for the first time in their history. This was the first time the two had met. Neither Villa nor Zapata was willing to take on that power because both were interested in their separate domains. This would be the revolution's undoing. The two departed shortly afterward, never to meet again. The Aguascalientes Convention could not establish peace amongst the multiple revolutionaries, and the armies were soon back to attacking each other in attempts to strengthen their areas of influence. The ordinary people suffered from famine and typhoid, building resentment against the revolution. Pancho Villa suffered his first heavy defeats, which drove him to more violence and resentment against anyone who opposed him or supported those he opposed. In May 1917, Carranza won the presidential election without opposition and set to work driving other revolutionaries out of business. Villa was reduced to a bandit, and Zapata was murdered. Under Carranza, Mexico adopted a new constitution that protected the social rights of all workers. But Carranza himself was murdered in 1920, finishing the Mexican Revolution. Obregon, who fought for Carranza but eventually turned on him, leading to Carranza's death, would become president later that year. The country has not seen such violence and destruction since, but much of its success came from Villa and Zapata, although neither man lived long enough to see it. Their alliance helped the revolution take enough power to reset the country, finally creating enough space for people to develop the modern culture and government Mexico enjoys today. How would you like to get a deeper understanding of history, impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events? If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. To learn more about the Mexican Revolution, check out our book, The Mexican Revolution, a captivating guide to the Mexican Civil War and how Pancho Villa and Emiliano Zapata impacted Mexico. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.